Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. In this segment, I'm going to give you the latest with election fraud that the media is absolutely, that the media won't tell you about. And I don't mean that as some sort of BuzzFeed headline. The media literally refuses to talk about any of this. Did you even know that there was this big hearing yesterday in Michigan? It was the Michigan State Senate Oversight Committee. 7 hours. Arizona had one 2 days ago. It was like 10 hours. And no one covered it. They're just trying to make it like these things aren't even happening, right? Like there's no legitimate accusation to ever even be made, and they're just ignoring it all. And it's amazing to watch, and it's working for them. First, I just want to say that I do not deal on this show with statistical anomalies. It's not my game here. I'll give you one. A little fun fact, a little fun 2020 election trivia here. There are 19 bellwether counties that over the last 40 years have always been in line with the winner of the president, right? For 40 years. If this county goes blue, the Democrat wins. If this county goes red, the Republican wins, which is a lot because it bounces around, right? So it's like a swing county, bellwether county. For 40 years, there's been 19 counties that got it right every single time. In this election, 18 of them went for Trump. 40 years they've gotten it right. And this is the one where 18 of the 19 got it wrong. And the one county that Biden won, it's in Washington, Biden won it by 3 points. The other 18 counties that Trump won, he averaged the win by 16 points. He crushed it in the bellwether counties. If you broaden it out a little bit, of the bellwether counties since the year 2000, so just the last 20 years, there's 58 bellwether counties. Trump won 51 of those 58, an average of 15 points. And Biden, the 7 that he won, he only won by an average of 4 points. Statistical, a little trivia, okay? Now, you can't go to the Supreme Court with that. You can't go to the Supreme Court and say, hey, Supreme Court, there were 27 toss-up congressional races. Republicans won all 27 of them, but Trump lost? That seems fishy. Like, you can't play that game. What do we deal with here? I deal with the law and numbers. I'm not here for statistical anomalies because anyone could explain those away, right? Anyone could explain it away and just be like, oh, well, there was a big get out the vote drive in Atlanta. And, oh, yeah, bellwether counties, you know, Trump's a different kind of candidate. 2020 is weird. And that's right. I deal with the law and with the Supreme Court. And I'm interested in how the law and numbers. And I'm interested in how the Supreme Court's going to rule. So I got 3 cases here that I'm certain, well, 2 I'm 100% certain, that the Supreme Court will rule in Trump's favor on. So let's go over these quickly. We did this the other day. I'm going to give a more concise version here so you can spread the word. October 2019, the Pennsylvania legislature passed what's called Act 77. It does a couple things regarding voting, but the relevant one here is it creates a whole new category of voters, a whole new method of voting called no excuse needed mail-in voting. The Pennsylvania Constitution is very clear that you must vote on election day. There's no early voting in Pennsylvania. You must vote on election day, or you can have an absentee ballot. And there's 4 reasons you can have an absentee ballot. If you're out of town for work, if there's some religious reason why you can't vote on that day, if you're sick and disabled and you can't vote in person, or if you're an election worker and you're working that day so you can vote early. That's it. That's the only 4 reasons. That's in the Pennsylvania Constitution. The state legislature passed a law, Act 77, and it created this whole new way to vote, not absentee, but mail-in voting. The problem is, to change the Pennsylvania Constitution, which this does, it requires more than just passing a law. It requires 2 votes from 2 consecutive legislatures. So one legislature votes, you got to wait until there's a whole new legislature a year or 2 later, and then the next legislature has to vote again. Then it goes to a vote of the people. The Pennsylvania legislature did not do this process. They just passed it one time, that's it. So this is the argument that Trump's team is, one of the many arguments actually in Pennsylvania that Trump's team is making, is that Act 77 isn't legal. Therefore, all those mail-in votes aren't either. So the questions are, in front of the Supreme Court, does Act 77 even exist? It didn't go through the constitutional process, so it isn't even a thing. And then what? Now what do you do with all those mail-in votes? What's the remedy is the key word. It's a very legitimate question. And like we have to ask ourselves, like, does it matter? Like does the legislative process matter or not, right? If it doesn't matter, then whatever. Like, we'll just who cares about it? But if there is a constitutional amendment process, you have to do it. And if you don't do it, what are we just going to say? Well, like what a bizarre world where we don't follow the legislative process. And then the excuse afterwards is, well, it's such a big thing, overturning all these votes. Therefore, we just got to go with it. So what are we doing? Let me tell you this. Two things quick before we get to the other two cases. There is no next time. Right? Like, this is it. If this is not taken care of now, there is no next time, because who cares? The rules could just be broken. The legislative process can be broken. The constitutional amendment process, it doesn't exist. Second thing, Sam Alito made a decision back in October about Pennsylvania. It was about a different aspect of Pennsylvania. This is about the fact that the Secretary of State and the state Supreme Court said that ballots can arrive up to 3 days after Election Day. They just made that up out of whole cloth. So Sam Alito made a judgment on that. He said the court's handling of the important constitutional issue raised by this matter has needlessly created conditions that could lead to serious post-election problems. Well, here we are. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has issued a decree that squarely alters an important statutory provision enacted by the Pennsylvania legislature. So then he goes on, he talks about why these late arriving ballots need to be segregated. He said they need to be segregated so that if the state Supreme Court's decision is ultimately overturned, a targeted remedy will be available. This is important because it is entirely possible, and here's Alito signaling, that the state Supreme Court's decisions could be overturned, and that a targeted remedy is possible and available. And because the media is ignoring this, half the country is going to be completely blindsided if or when the Supreme Court actually does that. That's Pennsylvania, Act 77, remember that. I'll give you another one, Michigan. Michigan, the Secretary of State, her name is Jocelyn Benson. She sent out exactly 355,392, we'll call it 350,000. 350,000 unsolicited ballots. Michigan law requires 2 signatures for absentee voting. You need a signature on your application form to request a ballot, and then you need a signature on it's called the security sleeve of the ballot. 350,000 ballots were mailed out that no one requested. I think Biden's up in Michigan by like 120,000 or something. Don't quote me on that number, but it's something like that. So 350,000 ballots mailed out that no one's requested, and we can't match the signatures because there are not 2 signatures. There's a bunch of other things in Michigan on top of that too, right? There's 30,000 voters who said they sent in their absentee ballot, but the state doesn't have it as counted. 35,000 ballots that were counted that were not associated with any address at all, like 0 address. It's one thing to have an address that's a P.O. box, which is illegal, or a commercial building, which is illegal. And a lot of people, they put a P.O. box, but they write apartment number. So they know that you're not supposed to put a P.O. box, but they hide it by putting apartment number. That's all one thing, but with no address, 35,000 of those. 13,000 ballots were from people who were registered to vote in another state, right? 74,000 ballots were requested online with no signature. These all violate the law. And I'll throw in the last one for good measure here, Wisconsin. I think this is the most rock solid case. Well, I don't know, the Pennsylvania one's pretty. Anyway, Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, you have to show a ID to vote. You have to show an ID. The only way around that is to say you're indefinitely confined. All right, so this means you're so old or so sick, you don't even have an ID. Usually about 5,000 to 10,000 people a year apply for this, an indefinitely confined ballot. This election, 200,000 people said they were indefinitely confined. Now, the reason I think this case is so rock solid is because it was back in, I think, like March or April, the county clerk of Madison sent out a Facebook message to everyone, Facebook post, saying, hey, everyone, COVID is a good enough excuse to apply for an indefinitely confined ballot, and you don't need to show an ID if you do. And the state Supreme Court unanimously in Wisconsin came back and said, no. COVID is not a valid excuse. It was a unanimous decision saying COVID is not a valid excuse to apply for an indefinitely confined ballot. You must show an ID. And it's a criminal offense if you apply for one and you're not actually indefinitely confined. 200,000? Usually there's like 5, 10,000, 200,000. That's Wisconsin. I think Biden's up by like 20. So listen, those are 3 rock solid cases. Those aren't weird coincidences. That's not like witness testimonies, he said, she said. Like you hear this argument a lot about like the pristine ballot. There'll be like a poll worker who saw ballots in Georgia that weren't folded or something. And you're like, like I don't even know really what that means. Or like, I need to, right? That's how, these aren't statistical anomalies. These are numbers and the law. And again, I think there's going to be a lot of people blindsided when the Supreme Court rules on these cases. So again, the remedy. What's the remedy? Will the Supreme Court throw these votes out? That's a big ask. Or will they give a very strong wink and a nod to the state legislatures to give them the political cover to do just that? I don't know, but we got less than 2 weeks to figure this out. Speaking of lawsuits, it is shockingly easy for someone to forge a quitclaim deed on your home in your name. So they hack into your county clerk's office, which is protected by Barney Fife. They trace your signature that's on your title, and they start taking out loans against your home until your equity's gone. And you don't know until the collection bills start coming to you. No one is watching your home title for you. No one's watching it. The bank isn't. Your county's not. I mean, they think it's you doing this because they're forging your name, right? Other identity theft programs don't monitor this. It's only Home Title Lock. That's it. And Home Title Lock will spend up to $250,000 in legal fees to help you restore your home title afterwards because it's a fraud case. So it's going to go to court, this whole thing. It's part of owning a house. HomeTitleLock.com. You can register your address, see if you're already a victim, and use the code RADIO for 30 days of free protection. Radio on the website, HomeTitleLock.com. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, thanks for being here. The history was made the other day. The first female football player in a Power 5 conference. This is one of the most delusional things I've ever seen. I refuse to live by lies. We'll nod to Rod Dreher right there. Now, this is a silly story, but it's a very clear example of calling out lies that can help us build our live not by lies muscles so that we can call out other lies that people are trying to peddle to us as well. Does that make sense? So I'm acknowledging that this is a silly example of this, but an example nonetheless, and one that we should all be able to jump on board with. So everyone's fawning over this woman. I was at a car dealership yesterday or the day before, and there were a couple guys in the waiting room, and the people at the car dealership subjected us all to watching the Today Show. And they were doing this story about Sarah Fuller and how she's like this is the greatest athletic achievement of all time. She's shattering glass ceilings, a female football player. Oh, this is incredible. Women really can do it all. Hillary tweeted, "Thank you, Sarah, for helping to prove that women and girls belong on every playing field." Quite literally, lol. ESPN said, I'm not even kidding, she achieved immortality. Okay? That's what we're talking about. She achieved immortality. Remember the name, Sarah Fuller. You'll never forget it. Now, Matt Walsh had a good point. You got like haters like me, right? Misogynistic haters who just have a tough time admitting that she did a pretty spectacular job. She went 5 for 5 on field goals. She had a 42 or 44 yarder. She kicked 3 touchbacks, 1 past the end zone. It was pretty remarkable. She made, and this is the part, misogynists like me don't like to admit, but she made a game-winning or game-saving tackle as the clock expired in regulation. So it was pretty amazing. Wait, it's not. She actually kicked the ball one time. It went 30 yards. Vanderbilt lost 41-0, and the head coach was fired after the game. Here's 3 reasons why I bring up this goofy story. First, live not by lies. It is a lie that what this woman did was impressive. Cut it out with the sentimentality. Cut it out with the historic blah, blah. Stop playing along. She did a terrible job at the task at hand. She kicked it 25 yards in the air and it rolled another 5. There's nothing impressive about that. And if that was my daughter, I'd be embarrassed for her. I was thinking about this. If Grace, she's 2.5 now, right? But if she wanted to do something like this, the only way I'd be all for it is if it was like a joke. And like she knew it. Like if she was in on the joke. And she's like, oh yeah, my football team stinks. It's like the last game of the year. Coach is getting fired and they want me to kick it. Like that, then I'd be like, oh, that's okay. Let's get out there and have fun. Don't get killed, by the way. So as long as that was her attitude, but like, there's this delusion that she's like a football player now. Like there's like talk of like, oh, are you gonna continue your football career? And then the end of the Today Show is like, and Sarah has been watching NFL game film just to further correct. It's like, guys. So listen to these announcers just pretending how impressive this is.
Sarah Fuller is about to put her right foot into a football, speaking volumes to women around the world.
Awesome moment. You can hear the crowd. Everybody understands what's happening right now. This is a pretty cool moment.
And the kick down at the 35-yard line, and Sarah Fuller. Happy Thanksgiving. What a day. What a day in college football.
So it gets worse because apparently she gave the team a halftime speech. Kickers don't give halftime speeches. That's never happened. And then to have this girl lecture the guys on the team because they weren't cheering enough. That was her speech. Okay, so first point, live not by lies. Second point, this is so patronizing. It's patronizing. Women, let me put it like this. If an alien came from outer space and watched this scene unfolding here, and we're trying to explain to this alien that there are 2 different genders, he would clearly conclude that women are a shockingly inferior species. Women are so unimpressive that we have to treat them like little children, and we pat them on the head. Oh, good job. Great job, honey. Great kick. Like literally my 2-year-old, just yesterday, painted a giraffe, right? Painted a giraffe. And she took paint and just smeared it in a circle. And I said, oh, Grace, what's that? It's beautiful. What's that? Oh, it's a giraffe. Oh, Grace, beautiful giraffe. Let's hang it on your, like, that's the same thing. Oh, great kick. Wow. It was a bad kick. And all women should be offended that men are so patronizing to her. So seriously, if you're a woman, what's worse? What's worse? When you have a guy say, oh, hey, Toots, you can't play football with the men. Like, are you offended at that? Or are you more offended at, aw, you did so good out there. Great job. You should play in the NFL. Have you ever, you should do that. You're really good at football. Wow, that was really, really impressive. That's way, way more offensive than, hey, you can't play football. And honestly, if you get out there and played actual football as opposed to just kicking it, you could get killed. Like a full-grown man, 250-pound man running full speed could kill you. Oh, I'm offended, Bull. It's so bizarre because women are amazing. First of all, women can be incredible athletes. I mean, Katie Ledecky is the greatest swimmer of all time. Simone Biles is like a freak of nature in gymnastics. There's plenty of great female athletes. This is not one of them. Don't patronize her and don't patronize women, which leads into the third point. Feminists have so perverted the well, we don't even know what feminine strength really is. We hear all the time in our culture about toxic masculinity. And we've talked in the show about how clearly our culture doesn't understand what masculinity is. But in the process, we've also become very confused, equally confused about femininity and feminine strength, to the point where we think feminine strength is and can only be when women do manly things, like stereotypically manly things, like be on the football team. Oh, you're being strong. Like that's the only way a woman can be strong. We think feminine strength, and pop culture portrays feminine strength as like a 120-pound, detective flipping a 200-pound man over her shoulder. And we're like, oh, you go, girl. Like that's feminine strength. Like we don't understand masculinity, and for the same reasons, we don't understand femininity. Because we've been raising, our culture has been telling us to raise boys to be more like girls, and also girls to be more like boys. And apparently we can only celebrate women's accomplishments when they act more like men. And I think that's wrong. So we need to clearly define masculinity, and we need to clearly define femininity. So how do we raise our girls to be feminine? So we got to ask ourselves, what is classic femininity first? And I got to go here because we got some great guests coming up here, but the short of the answer is the opposite of everything that pop culture says. Right, so look at pop culture, look at the women that are held up as icons of femininity, and just do the opposite of them. Yeah, that's your great first start. Just like an example, like pop culture females are all like in your face and bold, and you go girl, and the future's female. It's all like, ah. Or should women be kind and gentle and gracious? By the way, all the things that our culture tells our boys they need to be, right? That's my point. Like boys are told to be kind and gentle. It's like, no. Girls should be kind, gentle, gracious, have a grace about them, thoughtful, affable, easygoing, sweet, lovely, righteous. A kind-hearted woman gains honor. I love 1 Peter, the incorruptible beauty. Oh, I love that, so good. Age doesn't affect it, nothing does. The incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. Feminism has taught women that they always need to be in competition with men. But a wise woman doesn't compete. A wise woman plays to her feminine strength, things that men can't do. It's all in Proverbs 31. Just go read Proverbs 31. It's all right there. And just raise your daughters to be that. She works with her hands in delight. One of the best lines is, she's not, this is so good, she's not afraid of the snow for her household. For all her household are clothed with scarlet. It's a great line because it's two meanings, right? Like the literal meaning is when it's cold out, we're protected, right? We're clothed with scarlet and we're kept warm. But then the other meaning is spiritually, right? Clothed in scarlet is the blood of Jesus. So the symbolism is in times of spiritual difficulty, her children, her household is spiritually strong, clothed in scarlet. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. It's so good. She honors her husband. She brags about her husband. She respects her husband publicly. How many women are always dogging on their husbands all the time with their friends? Stop doing that. You're giving your daughter a bad example, if nothing else. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Her children rise up and bless her. This is my favorite one. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. How good is that? Right? She smiles at the future. She doesn't worry. She's confident. A true strength, grace, and dignity. That's femininity. And feminist culture has destroyed all of this, where we can only apparently now celebrate women who play football. So where feminist culture has destroyed all this, the good news is always you can bring it back in your home. Raise your kids very differently. So I've tried months ago to do the stock market thing, like the daily tracking, like day trading, this, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I can't do it. Drives me crazy. I'm not made for it. I don't know if some people might be made for it. I can't do it. And very similarly, you could get sucked into the same thing with the price of gold. What's the price of gold right now? And you're like playing the gold markets. I'm not playing any gold markets here. I bought gold because I see chaos coming. I see unprecedented printing of money. I see trillions of dollars of spending bills, just like without any thought. Just like, oh, here's a $3 trillion bill. This is fine. And like multiple $1 trillion spending bills. And the value of the dollar is going down. And when that happens, the price of gold goes up. It's that simple. That's the end for me. It's not like a day-to-day investment. It's medium, and then it's also long-term, right? Something to pass down to my kids, and that's a pretty cool gift. Here's some gold. I wish my dad did that with me, right? I wish he bought $10,000 of gold in 1970 and handed it off to me. I'd be able to buy a mansion with it. $10,000 in gold in 1970 would be worth just under $500,000 today, all right? Patriot Gold Group, they're the best. Give them a call. Any questions you have. A+, Better Business Bureau, all of them. Consumer Affairs, 5 stars. Trustpilot, Google review, 5 stars, the whole thing. Get gold and silver in your hands. 1-800-798-4260. 1-800-798-4260. PatriotGoldGroup.com. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we never watch movies in our house. We just don't have time. Anytime we do watch a movie, it takes us like 3 days to get it, but to watch the whole thing. But we've watched 2 movies recently. We just watched Hillbilly Elegy last night, and it's all about honor, right? Appalachia South. And then the other day, I'm less proud to say we watched Karate Kid 2, where Danny LaRusso goes with Mr. Miyagi to Japan. And that movie is all about honor code as well, with Mr. Miyagi and Sato. You should watch it. In that vein, the new honor code, a simple plan for raising our standards and restoring our good names. Grant McCracken, anthropologist, is with us right now. Grant, how are you, sir?
Good, Mike. How are you doing?
Good. I can't tell by that chuckle or not whether or not you're a big Karate Kid 2 fan. I can't quite. You don't have to admit that you.
It's on my list.
Perfect. But let's talk about this, because what is honor? And what is honor? What is dishonor? Did we used to live in an honor culture? What are we living in now? We got a lot of big questions here. So let's define our terms first.
You bet. Honor prevailed as a moral compass in the West for hundreds of years and millions of people. And it began to die a quiet, agonized death sometime in the 18th century. And by the time we roll through to the 21st century, it's pretty much done for, right? So everywhere you look, you see people behaving in a way that honor, the God of honor, would find completely unacceptable, completely astonishing, in fact. So you've got Lori Loughlin and you've got Nassar and Epstein, and just a crowd of people competing with one another to behave in dishonorable ways. So that really was the question for me, was I had studied honor in the 16th century, and I could see the way in which it made Elizabethans better, kinder, more noble people. And I thought, is there any part of that we could bring back to the present day? So that was my plan.
Beautiful.
So honor is that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, can you give me an example of I'm sorry for the disconnect. What's an example of, or what would it look like, 16th century honor that you say maybe encourage people to behave a better way? Can you give an example of that?
Right. I think honor was your social capital. It was the thing by which you were known in public. It was the thing that gave you access to a whole range of capitals, access to court, who you could marry, what communities you could travel in. So people cared about their honor. It was their passport, in a sense. People cared about it extraordinarily. They did amazing things too. You get Raleigh going off to examine the New World. He did that to build his own honor. It also made him fabulously wealthy, which can't have hurt. But the thing that sent him across an ocean to a world he couldn't anticipate was this notion that honor mattered, and that he could accrue honor by certain kinds of behavior.
Is that Okay, what have we replaced that with? If we don't do that anymore, what do we do instead?
I think some of it might be celebrity. I think people would rather be famous than honorable. And that celebrity is a kind of currency in our culture that gets you access to certain communities, and it is fungible, right? The more celebrity you have, the more you can build online, the more you can bring to yourself, sometimes through dishonorable behavior. That's the great tragedy here, right? Is that behaving badly doesn't cost you your celebrity, it sometimes builds your celebrity. So celebrity and honor are sometimes really at odds with one another.
Yes, that's the difference. Okay, so when you talked about like Raleigh traveling the world or whatever, for his honor, I interpreted that, because I've grown up in this, whatever culture we're in now, as like, oh, well, he was just doing that to get famous, or he was doing that for prestige. But that's more like celebrity, you're saying.
Exactly.
You're saying this is honor because it was a good, noble thing he was doing, not just a thing that would get him attention. Is that the difference?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And so he was doing it for his country, he was doing it for his monarch, he was doing it for his family name, he was doing it for his ancestors and all the Raleighs that would follow after him. He was building a currency and honor that would serve them all.
Okay.
And in America, we now say, well, you can behave badly, and you know what? Like Lance Armstrong, right? Behaved about as dishonorably as a person can. He cheated on the playing field. And then when he was caught, he lied about cheating on the playing field. And now he's planning his comeback back on the assumption that, well, Americans believe we're a country of second chances. And we believe that, everybody can make a mistake. Lance Armstrong didn't make a mistake. He damaged his sport and his own reputation beyond any hope of redemption, right? He can't be allowed back into the community after he actually accused people of the behavior of which he was guilty. He ridiculed people for not succeeding in the game in which he was competing. This is a really damaged guy who did fantastic damage to his sport. And his community, and that, I think that's one of the ways honor can serve us. We can say, listen, you get some honor just as table stakes, and then you can behave in a way that builds honor or costs you honor. But when you behave in certain particular ways, you damage your honor beyond the hope of redemption. It's gone, and you're done.
Okay, but you're right. That's very at odds with our American-y culture of forgiveness, even.
Right.
So what do we do with that? And you're not being nice either, Grant. Right? You're not being nice and you're not being forgiven. And I think of like the other extreme, which is like, as I mentioned, ancient Japanese culture, where you would literally stab yourself with your sword if you behave dishonorably to your family name. So we're like the opposite extreme, which is right. So how do you work out, you behave so dishonorably, you can't be invited back into polite company, and forgiveness?
Right, yeah. I think everybody I think we can build a simple moral compass out of this particular formula for honor. And the notion here is you have roles. You're a new dad, you were just saying, right? And all of us have this notion in our heads of what a father is. That's our role. And that role comes with rules. And the rules say, you behave this way towards your kids and this way towards your spouse, and here's what we expect you to do, right? We don't talk about it a lot. We don't sit down and kind of emphasize it very much. You have moments where men these days are kind of trying to rediscover what it is to be a man and all that stuff. But we don't, but for all of the extent to which we've fallen away from a moral code, we have this residual notion that a father ought to behave in these following ways. And this is a simple matter. Follow that rule book, and you're on your path to honor.
Yeah, good. Last question for you, Grant. I hope we can talk again. I want everyone to buy the book. How do we revive this in our homes and in our culture when we live in a more postmodern culture, which is, first of all, who are you to say? Who are you to say what's good, what's bad? Is there even such thing as cheating or lying or what? Like to that extreme. And then also, there's a whole backstory to this story and the thing I'm thinking of, and we don't have time for it, but you have this idea of like, you're slut shaming, or you're fat shaming, or you're this shaming, and you're that. You can't shame anyone ever, which I feel like has a connection to honor as well, right? So that's a long way of saying, how do we revive these things in a postmodern culture?
Right. No, it's a great question, and there is a kind of moral indeterminacy that haunts us. Every time we try to put a stake, a line in the sand, someone says, oh, no, but you can't possibly judge somebody for that. I think in point of fact, we have to judge people for things like that. I think that's our right. In fact, I think it's our responsibility. And who am I to say, well, I'm the anthropologist. I'm the person who studies American culture, right? So I'm making that claim to authority, whether it's a solid one or not, is for somebody else to decide. But I think it's clear. I want to say, look, there are residual pools of morality still in our culture, and we need to reactivate those. We know what it is to live without honor and without morality. We look at it around us and we think, oh my God, how much worse can it get? And it gets still worse. So time, I think, to revive both the notion of morality as an absolute thing we can see in the world, that we have the right to judge, that we have the right to insist on. And I think to call it honor is maybe one way to give it dynamism, to give it force, to give it power.
Oh, superb. Mr. McCracken, we must talk again. I'm going to read the book, and we're going to chat some more. It comes out soon, a couple days. You can pre-order it right now. The New Honor Code, a simple plan for raising our standards and restoring our good names. Oh, this is it for the year, Grant. This is the start of 2021. Your book and this new effort. I love it. All right, we'll do it again. Grant McCracken, thank you, sir.
I'm honored, Mike. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. We'll come back. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court case that went against Cuomo 5-4. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. I want to go to KEISHA Russell. She is a counsel at First Liberty to talk about a Supreme Court case that went down, was released the night before Thanksgiving. So it didn't get enough attention. We talked about it briefly, I think on Monday, but I want to go into a little more detail with Ms. Russell. KEISHA, how are you today?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here. So this case, it was Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn versus Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, and 5-4. Gorsuch wrote the main decision, and I loved his opening line, which was, where is it? Where are you? The government is not free to disregard the First Amendment in times of crisis. That could have been the opening line and the closing line, and it would have been sufficient there, no?
Oh, absolutely. And, the majority ultimately decided that New York was discriminating against religious institutions, which has been happening for a very long time now this year. And finally, the Supreme Court decided to stand up for religious institutions. I mean, ultimately, New York was telling churches and religious organizations that they could be limited to 10 and 25 people, but non-essential businesses were allowed to decide for themselves how many people they were going to allow in the building. And so this is a clear case of religious discrimination. Not only that, we know that some of the government officials, including Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio, have called out the Orthodox Jewish community by name more than once. And despite all of this evidence, there were still 4 justices on the court that wanted to avoid applying the heightened scrutiny that was necessary here, which clearly shows religious discrimination and results in having to effectively dismantle that executive order.
It's amazing that so the argument was there could be a church, or the reality was there was a church that could fit 1,000 people, but they were limited to 10.
Yep.
And right next door could be a department store with totally different rules. Mm-hmm. Unbelievable.
That's right. And,
so what,
and even
go ahead.
And even, the dissent continues to point out, well, churches are different or religious institutions are different. But even when you look at some of the other facilities that the state allows to be open, for example, factories, right? Factories and other businesses where people are going to be inside all day long. This is no different. And in many cases, a longer and a stronger potential for spreading COVID-19. And so I think ultimately none of these organizations or churches had any issues with COVID-19. They've been following the CDC guidelines. They've been practicing all of the safety precautions. So there was no need for this capacity limit. And certainly it shows that the governor had some sort of animosity towards these religious organizations in the first place.
Can you help us understand what heightened scrutiny is, right? So I read the decision here, and there's a couple of those technical terms that I don't understand. Didn't go to law school. What is heightened scrutiny?
Okay, so heightened scrutiny means, so first I'll start with any time the government discriminates against religion. That means the government is treating religion differently than everything else, right? What the court has to do is look at the government's interest for saying it's doing this. So the government says, we have a compelling interest in stopping the spread of COVID-19. Okay, we will accept that. But then the next step is saying, well, if you have that compelling interest for stopping COVID-19, why don't these restrictions apply to everyone? Why do they only apply to these religious institutions? Why aren't you closing the factories? Why aren't you closing the department stores? Why aren't you closing the liquor stores? And when the government can't justify that and the government doesn't have a proper reason for that, then the court has to throw out the regulation. And that's what heightened scrutiny does. It protects a religious organization from that kind of discrimination when the government can't explain why it's treating churches and other religious institutions differently.
So if it's not heightened scrutiny, what's like the alternative to that? Or what are the other like degrees or variances if not heightened scrutiny?
Okay, so the other form of scrutiny would be what you would call rational basis. And that's what a lot of courts have been applying to these types of executive orders, giving executives a lot of deference in the executive orders they've been issuing as a result of COVID-19. So what that means is the court just says, is this rational? Is it rational to say that churches or other institutions should be limited to 10 or 25 under these circumstances? And it doesn't completely scrutinize the government's reasons for doing that to the same degree as what would happen under strict scrutiny is what it would be called under heightened scrutiny. So rational basis just means, is it somewhat rational? And under that level of scrutiny, the government almost always wins because it's such a low threshold to meet.
Wow, and that makes perfect sense. So that's just up to the justices to decide, right? Is that what that is?
Well, what happens is under the First Amendment, whenever religion is discriminated against, and this applies to many protected classes, right? Race, for example, whenever the government is treating certain protected classes in a discriminatory manner, the court is required to apply heightened scrutiny. Required, it's not an option. What some courts have been doing is saying, well, because of COVID-19, we're just going to apply rational basis because this is a different situation. But that's not how it works. Under any circumstance, pandemic or otherwise, if the government is treating certain classes differently, the court is required to apply heightened scrutiny. It's not an option. It's just many courts have been trying to find a workaround for it. And even the justices that dissented, in their dissent, they're sort of decrying and talking about science and this whole thing. And even those justices avoid acknowledging that strict scrutiny applies here and that New York would undoubtedly lose under it.
Wow. I love when things make sense. Thank you for describing that so clearly. So let's talk about the dissenters for a minute. So I read Roberts, and it seemed like one of his main things was, well, maybe this violates the Constitution, but Cuomo did get rid of it at the last minute. So we're not really going to rule on it. It's not relevant. Was that his main argument? And was that the other justices who dissented arguments?
Well, that was part of their argument. And this is not the first time New York has done this either. The Supreme Court takes up a case because they misbehave in one of their regulations, and they try to moot it by dismantling the color-coded system. And what they did here was just take those specific institutions out of that color-coded system and reorganized it and said, okay, now you guys are no longer in the zone where you have to be limited to 10 or 25. But the very next day, the government could easily put those religious institutions back into that color-coded system. So it's a ridiculous argument to say that.
What a foolish argument. And I'm glad Kavanaugh in particular came down hard against that. He said exactly what you just said. So, but why would Roberts, I feel like, I don't know, I'm sure there's a principled stance argument he'd make for that, but it sounds like he just got tricked, right? That's what it looks like, that he just got hoodwinked about it. But why would he not rule otherwise on that?
there's just no telling. You know, Justice Alito gave a speech recently in front of the Federalist Society and really warned that religion is becoming a disfavored right. And we at First Liberty have seen that happen over the last few years. And, you know, he's right. And I think it was a warning that we all really need to take seriously, because ultimately, if you have 4 justices that are willing to, in the face of direct religious discrimination, in the face of brazen hostility towards the Orthodox Jewish community, and those justices are still willing to vote against the religious institution, you know, it's very concerning.
Totally. Why was this not applied larger? Right. So I'm in California, and we have similar, right, cease and desist orders going on for churches. I guess the difference is maybe it's not different, right? It's not explicitly different than other businesses. But
Well,
I don't know. Good.
Whenever you go to court on a case, you're really talking about those particular plaintiffs and those parties and the specific executive orders at issue in that specific case. But what a case like this does is warn the other governors that if you issue an order like this and it comes to the court, we're no longer tolerating it. So that's the power of this kind of decision. But ultimately, it does apply to the state of New York and these specific organizations and parties that went before the court.
Yeah. Do you think, my last question for you, KEISHA, is do you think this is an ignorance on behalf of these politicians about religion, or do you say it's just straight up animosity? I know I'm putting you in a potentially troublesome spot. I'm not asking you to know the hearts and minds, but just general as you've been watching this. Is it ignorance or is it a hostility towards?
Well, I think it's hostility. And the reason I can say that is because a lot of people will say no one intends to discriminate against religion. No one means to do that. We're just doing what we think is best. And I think all of these governors are in a very tight spot in trying to control what's happening with this outbreak. But at the same time, intent is not an element to prove religious discrimination. You can be doing it and not intend to do it. And I think that's one of the things that people don't understand about it. You can discriminate against religious organizations, even if you don't in your heart mean to do that. And that is ultimately, I think, the reason why some people are not understanding how blatant some of this really is.
5-4, amazing that we're just one justice away from this not being ruled properly. KEISHA Russell, counsel at First Liberty Institute. KEISHA, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Superb. Love when this stuff makes sense. That's it. We'll do it tomorrow. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.